If I told you that one of the most powerful tremors shaking Western defense circles today isn't coming from Washington, Moscow, or even Beijing, but from Islamabad? Yes, a fighter jet built by Pakistan, the JF-17 Block 3, is now in the hands of Azerbaijan, and that single act is sending ripples through NATO headquarters, Moscow's war rooms, and the energy corridors of Europe. When Pakistan decided to export its JF-17 Block 3 fighter jets to Azerbaijan, it was not just a commercial or diplomatic agreement, it was a move that shook the geopolitical landscape of the Caucasus region to its core, because Azerbaijan is no ordinary state. It is a nation that has been locked in decades of rivalry with Armenia, a rivalry that spilled into open war in Nagorno-Karabakh not once, but multiple times in recent history, and every conflict between these two nations attracts the attention of larger powers, Russia, Turkey, Iran, and of course Western alliances, because the Caucasus is a strategic crossroads linking Europe, Central Asia, and the Middle East. So when Baku suddenly acquires a fighter jet that could decisively tip the scales in future confrontations, Western defense experts cannot afford to remain silent. They must watch closely what this means for regional stability and for their own interests. The shockwaves come from the fact that Azerbaijan's air force was not considered particularly advanced compared to its neighbors. Its military victories in recent years leaned heavily on Turkish drones and ground tactics, but now with the JF-17 Block 3, Baku gains something far more lethal, a manned combat aircraft with the ability to enforce air superiority, carry advanced Chinese-supplied weaponry, and challenge Armenia's Russian-supplied defenses, and that instantly changes deterrence calculations, because any time one side feels emboldened by new capability, the likelihood of miscalculation and renewed fighting increases, and that possibility sends alarm bells ringing in Western capitals that are already wary of another war erupting near Europe's eastern borders. Beyond the Armenia-Azerbaijan rivalry, there is also the message this deal sends to Moscow, Washington, and Brussels. Because the Caucasus has always been a chessboard for influence, Russia has long styled itself as the security guarantor in the region. The United States and European Union have tried to mediate and prevent instability, and Turkey has stepped in as Azerbaijan's powerful ally. So now Pakistan inserting itself into this theater by arming Azerbaijan is seen as a bold move that complicates every external player's strategy. It raises the question of whether Pakistan is merely acting as a seller or positioning itself as an emerging influencer in regions far beyond South Asia. And that is why Western defense experts are not only watching the jet itself, but the wider ripple effect it creates in a region where even small shifts in military power can lead to disproportionate consequences. The JF-17 Block 3 stands apart from earlier models and from many other fighter jets in its category because it brings to the table a technological leap that Azerbaijan could not have imagined acquiring so easily. Western defense experts are stunned not simply because Baku bought new planes, but because the level of capability these aircraft offer can rival even Western 4.5 generation fighters in some areas. The inclusion of an ESA radar is particularly significant because this type of radar provides not just extended detection range, but also resistance against jamming and electronic interference. It allows multiple targets to be tracked simultaneously and enhances situational awareness, something that makes a relatively low-cost fighter into a formidable adversary for any neighboring air force that lacks similar radar technology. The avionics suite has been overhauled compared to earlier versions, giving pilots advanced cockpit displays and sensor fusion that enable quicker decision-making in the heat of combat. The missile systems carried by the JF-17 Block 3 push the threat perception even further, because with beyond visual range missiles supplied by China, Azerbaijan's air force suddenly gains the ability to strike targets long before they can retaliate, and that transforms the nature of any potential conflict. Armenia's Russian-supplied defenses are strong, but they are not invulnerable. and a fleet of agile fighters equipped with modern sensors and long-range missiles can pose challenges that were not previously considered credible from Azerbaijan. Western defense experts know that technology is often the greatest equalizer, and when a developing nation like Azerbaijan gains access to cutting-edge systems at a fraction of the cost of Western jets, it undermines long-standing assumptions about who holds the edge in a given theater of conflict. For decades, access to this kind of capability was restricted to wealthier nations who could afford expensive Western aircraft, or to states closely aligned with superpowers willing to provide them. But the JF-17 changes the equation. Suddenly, a country like Azerbaijan can field modern jets with competitive avionics, stealthier designs, helmet-mounted displays, and electronic warfare capabilities. And all of this at a price tag that undercuts the traditional Western suppliers by a massive margin. This democratization of advanced combat aviation is deeply unsettling for Western defense planners, because it signals that nations outside their influence can now achieve levels of parity once considered impossible. It raises concerns about how future wars will be fought and who will control the skies when countries outside NATO or Western partnerships are suddenly flying jets that can go toe-to-toe with their own. For decades, the global arms trade has been dominated by a handful of powers: the United States and its European allies on one side, and Russia on the other. They held near monopolies in the defense markets, deciding which nations were deemed worthy of acquiring advanced weapons and which were left dependent on outdated systems. This monopoly gave them not only enormous financial benefits, but also political leverage, because arms sales are rarely about weapons alone. They come with strings attached, with training, maintenance, and diplomatic influence woven into the package. But the export of Pakistan's JF-17 Block 3 to Azerbaijan represents a crack in that order. It is an undeniable sign that the monopoly is being challenged by new entrants who are willing to deliver advanced platforms without the heavy political costs or endless restrictions that Western suppliers impose. And this change is one of the reasons why Western defense experts are watching with such intensity. What makes the JF-17 such a disruptive force in this landscape is not only its affordability, but its performance-to-cost ratio. Western jets like the F-16, Rafale, or Eurofighter come with eye-watering price tags and require years of negotiation, licensing, and approval. Yet the JF-17 Block 3 offers advanced radars, beyond visual range missiles, modern avionics, and electronic warfare capabilities at a fraction of that cost. Suddenly, smaller or mid-level nations that were once priced out of acquiring modern air power have an alternative, and this alternative is not Western or Russian, it is Pakistani and Chinese. For Western arms industries, this is more than a lost sale. It is the erosion of their grip over who gets to control the skies in strategically sensitive regions. Western experts also understand that the arms industry is deeply tied to soft power and alliances. Every F-16 sold to a foreign air force cements decades of American influence. Every Eurofighter or Gripen brings with it European partnerships and training pipelines. But when nations start buying JF-17s, the long-term relationships shift. The buyers look to Islamabad and Beijing for support, upgrades, and joint exercises, which in turn weakens Western leverage. This is why the JF-17 deal is seen as far more than a commercial victory. It is a strategic breach in a monopoly that once allowed Western capitals to dictate the pace of military modernization around the world. And now, with Pakistan stepping into the seller's arena, backed by Chinese technological expertise, the monopoly is being challenged in ways that the West did not anticipate. Although the JF-17 Block 3 is marketed as a Pakistan-made fighter jet, every defense analyst knows that its backbone is heavily tied to China. From the radar systems to the missiles to the avionics, the Chinese footprint is visible throughout the platform, and this is precisely why Western defense experts are not looking at this deal as just a Pakistani arms export, but as a subtle projection of Chinese power into the Caucasus. When Azerbaijan buys the JF-17 Block 3, it is not just entering a partnership with Pakistan, it is indirectly plugging itself into the wider Chinese defense and technology ecosystem, and that has serious implications for the balance of power in a region that lies at the edge of Europe and Russia's sphere of influence. China has long been searching for avenues to expand its geopolitical influence beyond the Indo-Pacific, where its rise is already viewed with suspicion, and the arms trade provides a perfect instrument for that expansion. Every aircraft, missile, or radar that carries Chinese design or technology embeds Beijing's presence in the military infrastructure of another country. Azerbaijan's acquisition of the JF-17 therefore represents more than a procurement choice. It is a long-term binding to Chinese defense systems, logistics, and possibly even future upgrades. And Western experts recognize that this is how Beijing increases its influence without direct confrontation. By equipping countries that lie in strategically important corridors, Beijing extends its reach through defense cooperation while avoiding the appearance of direct military involvement. This also complicates Western strategic calculations, because the Caucasus is already a crowded theater where Russia sees itself as the dominant player. Turkey plays a protective role over Azerbaijan. Iran hovers nearby with its own anxieties, and Europe watches nervously due to the region's importance for energy transit. Into this delicate balance enters a Chinese-backed system, providing capabilities that Azerbaijan would not have otherwise acquired, and that increases the risk of misalignments and misinterpretations between the major powers. If Baku begins to rely more heavily on Chinese technology, it naturally reduces its dependency on Russian or Western suppliers, and this could gradually pull the region closer into Beijing's orbit. Western defense circles also understand that China's involvement is never transactional in the short term. It is always part of a longer strategic roadmap. By embedding itself into Azerbaijan's air force through the JF-17, China gains not only influence in the Caucasus but also a potential foothold in Europe's near neighborhood. This alarms Western analysts, because it means that what appears on the surface as a simple Pakistan-Azerbaijan arms deal is in reality a strategic play, where China is the invisible third partner, and that makes the export of the JF-17 Block 3 a development far larger than its price tag or the number of jets involved. Azerbaijan is not an isolated state where military decisions remain confined to its own borders. It occupies a uniquely strategic position at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, and its importance to Western defense experts lies not only in its proximity to Russia and Iran, but also in its role as a vital energy corridor supplying Europe with oil and gas. This is why every shift in Azerbaijan's military capabilities is scrutinized carefully, because stronger military capacity directly affects how confidently Baku can maneuver in disputes and negotiations. And the arrival of Pakistan's JF-17 Block 3 fighters feeds into this equation in ways that make NATO planners uneasy. The alliance has already been grappling with the challenge of balancing relations with Turkey, which is Azerbaijan's closest ally, and the strengthening of Azerbaijan's air force outside NATO's sphere of influence introduces yet another layer of complexity. When Azerbaijan buys Western-made weapons, there is always a degree of reassurance for NATO that comes with it, because such purchases typically involve training programs, interoperability exercises, and transparency. But when a country acquires aircraft developed by Pakistan with Chinese technology, there is no such guarantee of visibility or compatibility. Instead, NATO must calculate the potential risks of an air force in its wider neighborhood operating with systems completely outside its networks, which makes future conflict scenarios harder to predict. The JF-17 Block 3's ability to use advanced Chinese missiles and electronic warfare systems further complicates NATO's threat assessments, because it introduces new variables into a region already under high tension after repeated clashes between Azerbaijan and Armenia. The dilemma for NATO is made sharper by its relationship with Turkey. Ankara has always been a staunch supporter of Azerbaijan and played a direct role in strengthening its military during the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. The Western alliance depends on Turkey as a key member, but also struggles with Ankara's increasingly independent defense policies. Now, with Azerbaijan enhancing its fleet through non-Western suppliers, NATO must contend with the possibility of Turkey aligning more closely with this trend, creating a mini-bloc of states operating outside Western defense structures, yet located within areas critical to European security. This makes Western analysts nervous because it highlights the risk of losing influence in a region where the flow of energy pipelines, trade routes, and military alliances can impact the security of the European continent. Beyond the direct military concerns, NATO experts know that perception matters in geopolitics. The very fact that Azerbaijan is willing to turn to Pakistan and by extension China for advanced air power sends a message to other states that alternatives exist outside NATO's orbit. If this precedent encourages other nations in Central Asia, the Middle East, or even Africa to diversify away from Western arms, the cohesion of NATO's influence will face new strains. And that is why the export of the JF-17 Block 3 is being watched not just as a military transaction, but as a test case for how resilient Western influence truly is in regions that straddle their periphery. For decades, Pakistan was primarily seen as a defense importer, relying heavily on American F-16s, French Mirages, and Chinese aircraft to maintain its air force. But with the export of the JF-17 Block 3, Pakistan is signaling a new phase in its defense posture, one where it is not just a buyer, but a credible seller in the global arms market. This matters because arms exports are never only about commerce. They are about prestige, influence, and strategic weight. When a country begins to export advanced systems to other nations, especially to those engaged in conflicts or regional rivalries, it demonstrates that its defense industry has matured to a point where it can shape the security environment of other states, and that recognition shifts the way global powers evaluate it. Western defense experts understand this shift clearly. They see Pakistan no longer as a passive participant in arms dynamics, but as an active player willing to stake its claim in the defense economy. The JF-17 Block 3 is at the center of this ambition. It is not a token product, but a competitive fighter jet with modern avionics, AESA radar, long-range missile capabilities, and electronic warfare potential. The fact that Pakistan has been able to develop and export such a platform in collaboration with China sends a strong signal to other developing nations that Islamabad can be a reliable defense partner. The export to Azerbaijan is proof that Pakistan can successfully market and deliver jets beyond its traditional defense circles, and this precedent may encourage others in Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia to consider Pakistan as a viable alternative to expensive Western suppliers. For Western strategists, this is a concerning development because every jet sold by Pakistan represents not only a loss of market, but also a loss of political leverage traditionally exercised through arms dependency. Pakistan's defense ambitions are also tied to its desire for greater geopolitical relevance. By exporting advanced jets to conflict-prone regions, it positions itself as a nation capable of shaping outcomes far beyond South Asia. This export signals that Islamabad is no longer confined to its immediate neighborhood, but is extending its influence into the Caucasus, a region of immense importance for energy and security. Western experts fear that if Pakistan continues on this trajectory, it could evolve into a rising hub for affordable but capable weapon systems, aligning closely with China's global strategy of undermining Western dominance in critical markets. The combination of Pakistan's growing ambitions and China's technological support makes the JF-17 program far more than a national project. it becomes a strategic instrument that alters perceptions of Pakistan's role in global security affairs. The symbolism here cannot be ignored. A country long seen as dependent is now offering solutions to others, and the timing of this shift coincides with a period when Western arms exports face growing scrutiny over costs, delays, and political restrictions. If Pakistan can consistently deliver effective platforms like the JF-17 Block 3, it sets itself on a path to becoming a recognized defense supplier. And this recognition, more than the revenue, is what unsettles Western defense experts, because it means Islamabad is stepping onto the stage as a player with ambitions to expand. And ambitions in defense always translate into ambitions in diplomacy and geopolitics. So, when Western defense experts watch Pakistan's JF-17 Block 3 flying under the Azerbaijani flag, they are not just watching a machine, they are watching a shift in power, a rewriting of old rules, and the rise of a new player in the defense marketplace. This is no longer just about an arms deal, it is about what it represents. A world where smaller states are no longer bound to Western monopolies, where China extends its influence without firing a shot, and where Pakistan steps forward with ambitions greater than anyone imagined. And that is why this story matters. Because in the skies over the Caucasus, the future of global defense competition is already taking flight.